Hi everyone. I'd like to walk through the steps of creating a Mulan style poster in Photoshop. So let's take a look at some samples. If you go back to the 90s and you take a look at the original Mulan poster, this is what you got. This is that basic idea that there are two sides to Mulan's personality. You've got Mulan on the side and then her warrior side as a reflection in the sword. And you look at that and you see the updated version for the new movie that came out recently. Similar idea, much more dramatic, obviously, with the actress and doing it live action, and really nice detail. And this poster, I believe, was done by BLT and Associates, the design house. Now, in simple terms, I wanted to break down the steps that you might take to build a poster like this. This isn't going to be a super long video, so we won't do every single detail, but we're going to break down some of the techniques involved. Now, something to just observe on this one, we've got some interesting textures in the reflection. We have colors, color saturation going on the outside. We've got some special effects and some other additional details, and some cool things like the way the hair interacts with the sword. So a couple things there to think about as we develop the poster. So I have a, admittedly, low resolution version of Mulan, the actress here, that we can work on to try to build up this picture, and a few preloaded images. I've got a sword, nice red background, helmet, and we can use these items to try to build up a similar style, a similar design. And I tend to work from the background forward. So as I'm looking at this picture, I've got a few different combinations I'm going to make with this photograph. So first, what I'm going to do is make a duplicate. So I'll do that real quick by dragging the icon down to the duplicate button here on the layer palette. And the original, I'm going to go ahead and set and try a different blending mode. I kind of like multiply. Sometimes what I'll do is go through and test different blending modes to see what I get. Hard light looks kind of nice too, vivid. So I think I'm probably going to stick with multiply. And we're going to figure out a way to kind of blend and remove the background and let some of that red show up on the sides, maybe on the right and the left-hand side of the picture. Couple ways to do it. Probably simplest I'm going to do is create a layer mask. And that layer mask is going to allow me to hide some of this background element that I don't need to keep anymore. So I'm going to switch to the paintbrush, and I'm going to look for kind of a texture brush, something with a little bit of texture on it. So this one I just grabbed off the Ultimate Pastel Palooza. I can look through a few others. There's some chunky brushes, special effects. I can test out a few different ones, but I'm going to stick with that kind of rough charcoal style brush. And I'm going to set my opacity down to like 40%, I mean. So I'm going to press the number 4. That's a little hotkey for that. And then I'm going to make sure that I'm coloring with black. Little tip, if you want to go back and forth between your foreground and background color, press X on your keyboard. Now notice how that brush is pretty bold. I might even lower opacity even more. As I kind of work with making some rough brush strokes. And I'm probably going to switch back to white at a low opacity and put back a few brush strokes here. Paint with black and kind of fill back in some of that texture that was on the side of her face. that I painted a little too much out. So the idea being here to just try to create a rough interaction between the image and the background that's showing through thanks to the layer mask and that red color coming through and that multiply blending mode. Now what I'm going to do is switch back to the normal Mulan, and I'm going to go ahead and make another duplicate because I might do this a few times. I might make a few layers of overlapping images as we move forward. In fact, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and make a layer mask and set that layer mask to hide the entire layer. And an easy way to do that is to go to the layer menu, and I'm going to go to layer mask, and I'm going to select hide all. And the reason I'm doing that is because I don't want to go through the trouble of trying to paint it out the picture. Instead, I'd like to reveal a portion of the picture slowly or in particular spots. Also, I'm going to go ahead and use the selection tool to make a selection first before I go ahead and do the reveal on the mask. So let's switch over to my quick selection tool. And what I'm going to do is select the main part of her face, making the brush a little bit bigger using the bracket keys. And I'm going to try to just get in and get to her face. That was a little too much. Okay, so maybe what I'll do is switch to this photo and see if it does a little better job of picking up the photo. There we go. Really, I'm not worried too much about her hair at this point. Just have to make the brush a little smaller maybe. Wow, that is really oversensitive. Let's see if I can get that back. There we go. I really don't need to be super precise with this. There, that's actually pretty good. Okay. So now that I have that selection, I'm going to go in with a new paintbrush. This time I might try something a little softer. I'm going to go into the general brushes and look for maybe kind of a softer airbrush. Make it pretty large, and I'm going to make sure that I'm painting with white, which means it's going to reveal, and I'm going to use a low opacity, like 30%. I'm just going to paint her face back in. I like having a little bit of that red bleed into the photo a little bit. And this way I'm just kind of painting it back. In other words, revealing that portion of that photo so it's more visible on the background layer. Now, if I'm going to go ahead and turn off the selection and maybe do a little bit here in the, oops, painting on the wrong layer. Need to go back to the mask, and I'm going to put a little more back in on the hairline because it looks a little weird right there. So sometimes what I'll do in a scenario like this is I'll do this again, but maybe I'll add a cool color to one of the sides. And actually we're going to do that with the sword, so I'm not going to bother with that at this stage of the game. But sometimes it's good to make multiple blends. So maybe I have a blended picture like this, which is some of the warmer colors, and then I might try putting like a cooler side on the other. And here's what I mean. I'm going to go ahead and add an adjustment layer at this point. So I'm going to go to Hue and Saturation on my adjustment layers, and I'm going to add it directly above this new Mulan layer we just made. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my Option key and I'm going to click the downward arrow right between the two layers. So when you press Alt or Option and you press the line dividing the layer from one layer from another, it gives you a little down arrow. And what that does is it points that adjustment to that layer alone, and it doesn't pass through to the layers beneath it. And what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to add a colorized hue and saturation tint. So see how that pink color already showed up and it just made it just a little bit cooler? I'm going to go ahead and beef up the saturation, and I'm going to slide that slider maybe into the bluish purplish range. Yeah. Now obviously that's really extreme, but this also has a layer mask on it, so we can hide some of this. And we can also adjust opacity as well. So I can lower the opacity of this little faint coolish tint. All right, so what I'm going to do now is hide the portions that I want to be in the warm color, and I'm going to leave the blue, the bluish, coolish color on the side I want to remain cool. So to do that, then what I'm doing is I'm going to be painting with black inside that mask, and I'm going to go ahead and use the airbrush. So here you can see I just paint back in the left side of her face. And it kind of left a portion of that blue in those areas where I wanted it to be cool, to remain cooler. So if I reveal that, you can see how it's done kind of a nice color adjustment there. Okay. So again, I can sit here and noodle this for a long time, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do a little bit and then proceed to the next step so we don't lose track of where we're trying to go. Now let's go ahead and see how this sword interacts with this picture. Now, right now it's pretty bright compared to the rest of the picture. I'm also going to try a blend on this and see what happens. So to do that, I am going to duplicate it like I've duplicated Mulan's face. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it. And I'm going to hide the copy, and I'm going to go to the original, and I'm going to try a blending mode on it and see what happens. Multiply, color burn, lighten, screen, overlay. Ooh, hard light looks kind of nice. Soft light. Linear light. This is one of those things where you just have to kind of decide what you like the most. And I'm going to go with hard light. And leave that there. And then something that we need to add to the edge of this is a little bit of a shadow. And so I'm going to try adding a drop shadow on this also and see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my layer styles down at the bottom, click that FX button, select drop shadow. And I'm going to go ahead and try making a shadow. You can kind of see the way it is with or without it. If I uncheck preview, you can see that's without it, that's with it. And I think that's good at adding that little dark color to the edge of the sword. All right, that's good. Looks like my distance is about 5, spread's about 25, and the size is about 50. And it's set to multiply, and it's set at a 50% opacity. So that looks pretty good. So I'm going to say OK. Now the sword is concealing a lot of her face, and in the original you got to see more of her face, and you've guessed it, I'm going to go ahead and use a mask to go ahead and put some of that back into on top of the sword. So I actually need to take this copy of Mulan, this original picture, and move it above the sword, and I'm going to see if I can paste back in some of that face over the top of the sword to kind of see if we can blend those two together. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to layer, and I'm going to add the layer mask again, and I'm going to hide all again. So I'm hiding the majority of her face. And then I'm going to see what happens as I use a mask to try to bring back some of the face on top of the sword. So I need to make a selection. And here's a quick and easy way to make a selection out of a clipped layer. Hold your command key and click the sword, the icon of the sword layer, and it should make a selection out of that object. Because that object is on a transparent background, you should be able to make a selection out of it like that. That's going to constrain my painting as I work inside the mask area. So now I want to make sure that I'm working on the second Mulan face mask layer. And I'm going to paint with white because I want to reveal the picture. And I'm going to use a low opacity, like 20%, and an airbrush. And I'm just going to paint back in little bits of her face. That's good. So you can kind of see that coming back in. Then what I'll do is I want to use that. I could try a blending mode here, see what happens. Let's see what I get out of that. I don't know about you guys, but I kind of like overlay. So I'm going to add that in there. And what I want to do too is I want to put back some of that color tint, make it cooler, that brush area on the sword to be kind of that cooler color. So I have the benefit of this selection already created out of the sword shape. If I leave that active, watch what happens when I make a hue and saturation adjustment layer. If I click hue and saturation adjustment while a selection is active, notice how it makes a mask out of the selection. So that's another really quick way to create a mask that you need to use in a targeted place. So I'm going to go ahead and try colorize on this again, and then switch over to the orangish, not the orangish, purplish colors, those cool colors. Beef up saturation a little bit. That's good. And then here again, I'm going to try a blending mode on it to see darken, multiply. I kind of like multiply on it. That looks kind of cool. Yeah, that's good. All right. Now, just like working on her face, I would probably do a couple more composites of targeted colors, highlights, bright spots, shadows to further enhance the sword. We don't really have time to do that together, but strategically, I would maybe create more of a bright spot along the edge of the sword. I'd go in and enhance the pupil, focus on the eyebrows, and things like that to build up the detail in the face. You'd need to spend a lot of time working on those areas to make sure they were really, they would really pop. And that's something I've found in my work, that when you focus on things like eyes and specific features like that, that really draws in the viewer. And you can accept a lot of, abstract areas as long as those areas are really well done and really bright and tight. I am going to try one thing though. I do want to make a bright edge along that sword. And I'm going to see if that's possible by applying another layer effect to the original sword I have down below. So I'm going to highlight that layer, go back down to the one that had the shadow on it, and I'm going to try a inner glow and see what I get. Yeah, I can already see it. So what that inner glow is going to do, it's going to spread a bright color inside the boundary of that shape. And I'm going to try to get it to spread inward. You can kind of see it along the left edge, and try to increase opacity to make it really a little more vibrant. Um, you can play around with the blending mode if you want to try, lighten or yeah, multiply I don't want to do, but lighten or color dodge. Ooh, color dodge, I like that. Maybe just a little bit lighter opacity. Almost makes it look a little bit like glass, honestly. Okay, that's good. So I'm going to click OK on that and leave that. So you can kind of see that with how that looks with and then without it. So with it, I think that's improved. That creates a nice little bright spot. And if I was really corny, I might put a little twinkle in her eye, a little lens flare. All right. Last thing I'm going to do, just as we play around with this, is throw in the helmet. And I went through all this trouble to find a picture of a helmet, and we're only going to see a really small amount of it in this picture. But what I need to do is mask off all the other areas and then try a blending mode to get it to blend inside the shape of the sword. So what I'm going to do again is make a selection out of the sword shape. How do we do that? Command or Control on a PC. Click that icon layer, that layer icon. There we go. So I've got the the selection made. I'm going to click on the helmet layer, and I'm going to select the layer mask button, and that's going to hide the edges and put that helmet into that selected area inside the masking shape. And for kicks, let's see what happens when I add a blending mode on this thing. See if I can get one that kind of shows through. I mean, it needs to look like it's on her head, but so it can't really blend through the picture. But it can't really be darker than her face. So yeah, I think I'm going to go with kind of like pin light, actually. It has a little bit of texture on it, but I need to brighten it up a little bit and soften it because it's really contrasting a little too high with her face and not showing through very well. So what I'm going to do is apply a curves adjustment to that specific piece and see if I can bring that back a little bit. So I'm going to add a curves. Actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to do levels. Levels will be better. So I'm going to click on levels, and you see that it's going to add the levels adjustment layer above the helmet. And I need to do that little trick. I need to point the levels down to just the helmet. So I have to hold Option or Alt on your keyboard, click that line between the two layers, and that will point the levels adjustment to just that piece. And I'm going to double click the levels and see what I can do with it to kind of brighten it a little bit. Now that I'm doing that, it's looking kind of hokey with that pin light. So I may go back and set that puppy to normal and then adjust the levels and see what I get. Yeah. But you see what's happening is it's looking like it's in front of the sword and not behind or reflected in the sword. So I'm going to have to add back in some detail here to fix that. So what I'm going to do is go back to that sword copy that I had left. I'm going to go ahead and bring that above everything. And there you see that it's now above everything on the top. and I'm going to select that layer, make a selection. Actually, I don't need to do that. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna hide. I'm gonna do a layer mask, and I'm going to hide all on that one. So it's gonna hide that sword. And then what I'm gonna do is just lightly with the airbrush, I'm gonna use white, and I'm gonna brush that sword back in. Oops, I don't need a guide. And then I'm going to try a blending mode on it, see if multiplier or something like that. Maybe not quite enough, maybe lighten. Ooh. Color dodge kind of works. I like color dodge. Now, there's a secondary problem where it's kind of bright up here at the top. That's coming through on the helmet. There's a bright spot up there. I can choose to kind of hang on to that if I want to, or hide it. And I kind of like having that brightness up at the top of the picture. So maybe what I could do is, as a final step here, I could try painting a little bit of a brightening gradient to kind of match and blend into that. It's not in the original poster, but this is kind of one of those happy accidents I kind of like. So what I'm going to do is make a blank layer above everything. And something I like to do is I'll take white here, and I'm going to switch to a gradient. And I'm going to make sure that my gradient goes from white to transparent. And it's going to be a linear gradient. And what I'm going to do inside this empty layer is I'm just going to drag that color down over the top. And that fade isn't quite working. But with a blending mode, I might get what I'm going for. Like, look at how that soft light works. So that's after, that's before. See how that kind of brings out some of the background texture and some of that back in? All right, so what have we done here? We've done a variety of things to blend in and out a combination of duplicate photos with masks and with shadows and effects. And again, I would spend hours tweaking this and refining this and looking for little cues. Things that are really giveaways are reflections and shadows and different things that give it realism. And so I'm not quite happy with the way the helmet's looking and the sword and some of that. So I'd need to go in and refine that, add little details that enhance the shading or the reflection on the metal to fix those little things to make it look a little more real. And then there are some artistic things that I would do, is be playing around with the texture of the hair and the blending in the background and a variety of things like that to kind of tie it together and fuse it together. And you can see how even with just these few steps we've done, we've started to pile up layers on top of each other to build up this design. And so hopefully that gives you some ideas on how you can use multiple layers to kind of layer together your picture. It's a little bit like building up a painting where you're doing slow and steady transparency painting layers on top of layers like watercolor, where you're just building up a little bit at a time as you're developing your image. And in this case, we're using a photo. All right, so hopefully that was instructive, got some ideas from it. So we'll see you next time. Take care.